All right, folks, welcome. You have found Church on the Hills, On This Hill podcast with Bruce and I.
Today it's Bruce and I.
Yes.
On
Now,
this
which
hill.
one's Bruce and which one's I?
Yeah. I'm not confused yet, but I will get there.
Yeah. Before we get started on a topic, which we want to talk about, maybe ending well, what that looks like, I just want to say happy anniversary.
Thanks. Yeah, my wife and I just celebrated 46 years. That's amazing.
46 is...
Goes quick.
That's a big number.
It's a lot of numbers.
That is. I mean, you're super close to 50, which is definitely one of those like, wow.
That's a cruise or something. That's got to be worth it.
It's got to be worth something. I don't see you on a cruise.
I'm not that kind of guy, I don't think.
No, I don't
Never
see
done
Linda.
one, so I can't really judge.
I don't see Linda on a cruise either.
Being on a boat with 3,000 people is not... I mean, no offense if that's your thing. You love cruises, but
no, it does.
I'm more of a solitary kind of
I think I'd
give
skip
me a
a
warm
cruise.
beach
If someone
and
wanted to give me a cruise, I'd take it, but I'm not going to go
Yeah.
spend my money on a cruise, probably.
And I would overeat. From what I've heard, that's all people do is eat. So.
Well, if you're locked on a boat, what else are you going to do?
Yeah, what else are you going to do? You have all this free food. So.
Yeah. Any words of wisdom from 46 years of marriage you want to share that's...
Yeah, you're most likely wrong. When you think you've got it figured out, you probably still got some learning to do.
So humility maybe. Is,
yeah, and keep growing. I mean, honestly, I think keep growing and feed the things, visit the things regularly that feed your relationship. It's kind of what we try to do. So
yeah, because you've gone through kind of all of those, not all the stages of marriage, but there's you're young married, you don't have kids.
Right, yeah.
And you got maybe more time and energy and all that. And then you're married with kids and then all the phases that kids go through and now out of the house and one grandkid.
Yeah, the grandparenting stage.
Yeah,
it's
so
a
the
lot of fun.
grandparenting stage.
Every stage is beautiful in its own way. I'm not sure. I think it's just part of the...
I think someone wrote a song about that.
Yeah, not to sound corny, but
everything is beautiful.
Yeah. Every season's got its great parts about it, but none of them sit still. They all keep moving.
Yeah. So I thought maybe we could talk about ending well because, for a few reasons.
Yeah.
One is this Sunday, we're kind of talking about overcoming, guarding the heart, what that looks like. And part of that sermon is about ending well. But also we're at the end of the sermon series, From a Life That Works. This week I've talked to quite a few of the life group leaders, including you actually just now, about life groups and what that's looked like, and most of them will be ending in the next couple weeks.
Yeah.
Some of them are going to be continuing, obviously, maybe take a break for Christmas, but then jump back in January. But it is the end of this sermon series, and in Proverbs there's a lot to say about the ends, keeping the ends in mind, what that looks like.
Yeah, endings are important because endings are inevitable. So we don't really like endings because it usually is something sad about it or nostalgic about it.
Yeah.
But, the Bible is full of endings. I mean, and what I love about the Word of God is the Bible is full of people and their life stories, how they began. Story of Joseph, for example, how he began, and all the middle, and then how he ended.
Right.
Story of Moses, how he began. And, and I love stuff like that. David, all the heroes of the faith.
Yeah, and maybe the not the villains, but the tragedies of the faith too.
Right.
People that might have started well,
but
didn't end well.
Yeah,
and it's a tragedy that the Bible doesn't flinch at, but will show us the stories of those men or women.
Yeah, right.
Who had a call of God on their life, or were going a certain direction, and then something derailed them.
Yeah, Book of Kings and First and Second Kings and Chronicles just literally chronicle the story of a whole bunch of kings who were handed something wonderful, but they squandered it through sin and idolatry and all kinds of other things. And others didn't. Others stayed faithful, Josiah and others that held on to the faith and actually brought revival back to the nation.
It's unfortunate, but if you're a Bible student and you're taking a test, and on that test will be just a list of all of the kings of Israel, and you're supposed to just mark beside them which were good and which were bad, which ended well and which didn't end well. Yeah. If you just put didn't end well on every single one of them, you would get a passing grade because most of them didn't. And so some not very good Bible students figured that out a long time ago. I don't actually have to remember all of them. I could just say they all ended poorly. Yeah. And you're going to get a 75, 80% on your test because so many of them didn't end well. But that's not what it has to be.
Yeah, it's true. It's not. It doesn't have to be that way. Yeah. But
and not what we really see in the New Testament. Although there are stories in the New Testament of failure, what you see with the men who Jesus surrounded himself by is mostly extreme faithfulness. Men who, ended their life very well, maybe painfully, almost all of them painfully, but very faithfully as well.
Yeah, Hebrews 11, right? You have that litany of people who endured or persevered, and through hardship and through trial, and they didn't just hang on by their fingernails. They ended up crossing the line well. Some it says not having even received the promise, but they held on to their faith.
Yeah.
It's interesting. This last Sunday, let's see, this will air next week, but we'll have already done our last message in the series. But there's that piece about seeing what you don't see, so to speak.
Right.
You know, that you see the invisible, which is the life of faith. And faith is super precious to God. Without faith, it's impossible. Of course, it says in Hebrews 11 to please God. But I think faith is super important because faith and hope, I guess, are kind of synonymous. So when you lose hope, when you lose faith, you lose a reason to live.
Right.
So not to mention the promise of eternity and the promise of redemption and so forth.
So maybe a life that does ending well, not that just ends well at death, but does ending well, is a life that glorifies God and maintains some faithfulness to his calling.
Yeah. It's staying, I was just thinking, it's staying, what's the word? Located, I guess. I'm looking for a different word maybe, but
oriented.
Orientated, right? It's in whether life is great or life is terrible. Faith is like this ballast that keeps me from tipping over and from sinking the ship. And that faith is grounded not in the ship, but it's grounded in something greater.
Yeah. Revelations 2:10 says, "Be faithful unto death, and I will give you the crown of life." So we don't see the crown of life.
No,
right? That invisible.
not yet.
We don't see it, but we believe it.
Yeah.
We believe that what the Bible says is true, and that there's a reward. It's okay. I think sometimes we worry about talking about reward.
Yeah.
But it's okay to say, like, I want a crown, I want a reward.
Yeah.
And,
I want a good ending.
Yeah,
Who doesn't want a good ending?
Yeah.
Unless you're a nihilist or something like that.
So any idea, like, what's helped you maintain,
Stay orientated?
stay steadfast, faithful? Like, to just say, like, you should do it. Yeah, but what does that? What keeps someone steadfast and faithful through difficulty? Because if it was all easy days, no problem. But what about when I don't want to be faithful today and I don't see the end?
Yeah.
And there's maybe a temptation in front of me or a comfort in front of me.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the short answer, I think, for me is reminding myself of the end. Reminding myself, you read in the Old Testament, the prophets were constantly saying things like, "Remember." Right. God, as he brought his people into the promised land, he had them build monuments, whether they were rocks or whatever. And they were monuments of remembrance so that they could look and say, why is that there?
Yeah.
Well, so you don't forget what the Lord did. So you don't forget. And I think that's our downfall. I think we have terrible memories or we get distracted. And then when we're distracted, we forget. And when we forget, we make terrible decisions. And so I think God was constantly calling his people, two things: to remember who he was, but to remember who they were. This is our God, and we are his people. And all through the Old Testament, you see this kind of motif. He is our God, and we are his people, which gives us the sense of identity. You drift from that, and I think you're sort of at the mercy of circumstances or whatever comes along.
That reminds me, you're just talking about remembering and monuments. I read an article a few years ago, and I found it really, really fascinating. This guy was saying, you know what a memory palace is?
Yeah, I think so.
So people there's actually competitions who can memorize the most and then repeat it. They'll have these memory competitions. And the ones that win, they have this trick where they don't just try to remember it, but they place it somewhere, like if this was the room they were in or their living room, they'd say, okay, that lives behind that book on the third shelf.
Right. Yeah.
And because spatial orientation helps us remember the thing that's behind that book in our mind. anyways, that's a trick to remember things. Well, this guy was saying all of Israel is one giant memory palace, and that God used it. That mountain means this, and that mountain means this. This river means this.
Yeah.
This valley means this.
Yeah.
This monument that you built, remember, it means this.
Yeah. Oh, that's so good. So I don't typically will recommend a book, although we did last Thanksgiving, didn't we? But but I'm reading a book now called came out this year called Advent for Exiles. It's by a woman named Carolyn Cobb, and the whole book is an Advent devotional, 24, 25 devotionals. But what she does is she pulls on this very thread you're talking about. She says that, first of all, we were exiles from Eden because of our sin.
Right.
And the imagery in Genesis is these angels with flaming swords saying, you can't come back, you can't come back.
Right.
And so they become wanderers. They're in exile. They're missing. And then you come into the story of Israel, and God says, okay, I'm going to start all over again, so to speak, and I'm going to give you a promised land. I'm going to give you a home.
Right.
And it's interesting that in the temple and so forth, there was the same imagery. There were angels,
right,
and there were swords guarding, and there were things that reminded them.
Yes.
The carvings in Solomon's temple were carvings of fruit and abundance and so forth, reminding them of, hey, this could be home and God could dwell with you again. Of course, we know that didn't last. That was temporary. But it's just a fascinating thing of remembering, first of all, that I used to be home. I used to have a home. I used to be the presence of God was regular in my life. This is Eden. And I'm in exile now. I have to remember that. But to survive exile or even to thrive in exile, I have to remember that I have another home waiting for me, where God's presence is there once again, where fruitfulness and flourishing is there. It's just a fascinating idea.
No, that is really fascinating. I feel like this is something we could talk about a long time, just that our failure to remember is maybe the first thing. I wonder if that's the first thing that happens before we even stumble. Like I don't remember. What's the title of the book? I'm trying to think of. Practicing the Presence of God.
Yeah.
When I remember the presence of God is with me, I'm much more apt to keep moral integrity. Which moral integrity is one of the parts of ending well. Like, did this person live a moral integrous life, or did they fail? In their failure, were they restored? Did they do the work of being restored, or did they never get restored and poorly? But I think lack of memory. Bad memory killed more people in the Old Testament than any disease, than any leprosy, than any plague, because when they forgot God, it wasn't long before the entire nation began to go downhill. So the Psalms, forget not the Lord and all of his benefits, right? That motif again, that theme plays over and over and over again. And this is our life too, isn't it? This is why we have symbols. We have an American flag that reminds us we live in a democracy. That's a weak illustration because it's not in a perfect world, but it's a fact. We wear wedding rings, not because a ring has any power, but because the ring reminds us. My wife and I go out to dinner on our anniversary every year without fail, because it's a tradition. It's a thing that we do, this stake in the ground kind of a memory. Like, hey, 46 years ago, two young people stood at an altar and made these commitments. Yeah, it's a rehearsal.
It's a reliving. Reliving.
That's interesting.
I think people that don't have those, back to your original question, people that don't have those rhythms or practices, I think you're at a huge disadvantage because the world rushes to fill the vacuum.
Okay, so moral integrity, Acts 24:16 says, so I strive always to keep my conscience clear before man. Between God and man. I strive always to keep my conscience clear before God and man. Any stories? Any stories about what that has looked like at times when moral failure in leadership has impacted church community?
It's funny.
And what do we learn from it? Not just to like tell the story, but I think, like we're saying, memory. There's a reason why the failures are in the Bible as well as the successes, because they're warnings.
Right.
I just wonder if there's any of those stories that we should be learning lessons from.
Well, the Old Testament has a bunch, right? I mean, this last weekend we talked about Solomon, and Solomon was anointed by God to be the wisest man on the earth.
Right.
People came from the ends of the earth to hear his wisdom, and that wisdom produced incredible wealth and flourishing for both him and the people. But then you read in 1 Kings that his wives, his multiple women in his life, by the hundreds, turned his heart away from God. The problem wasn't the women. Right. We can't blame the women. The problem is Solomon's heart stopped following the God that had got him there and started following all these random pleasures, endless pleasure. And a man in that position, you can imagine how easy it was,
Right.
to have countless wives or countless amount of gold or horses. But all those things stole his heart.
Yeah.
So when you have moral failure, you always, a man always, or a woman always falls on the inside before they fall on the outside. It says in Proverbs, a fascinating passage, a loose woman, a prostitute, an immoral woman, is a deep ditch, and he that is under the Lord's curse falls into that ditch. So if you think about the timeline of that proverb, the guy was in trouble before he ever got to the woman or the ditch. The ditch was his undoing, but he was in trouble long before. So when you have a moral failure, you have an interior failure. Something has gone off inside. In my career, in our career, I've had a number of situations where I've had to work with people who have found themselves in that deep ditch. Right. And oftentimes when we talk, it's like, so what was going through your mind when you made these horrible decisions? And oftentimes the response is, I don't remember, or nothing was going. They weren't thinking. They were just, they were just in that moment alone.
Yeah, with Solomon, I think what served him so well at the very beginning was humility. At the very beginning, when God asked him, what would you have me give you? He realized, man, I can't do this. There's no way I can do this. I need wisdom. Give me wisdom, because he knew I wasn't enough. But then I think he stopped thinking he wasn't enough and started believing he was enough, and that maybe all of these great things in his nation came from him alone, instead of actually they were a gift from God, and they started with wisdom. And again, kind of a failure to remember, or a loss of memory, that humility will keep us safe.
Well, it isn't. How many people? I mean, again, you see that pattern over and over again, whether it's Old Testament or present day. You begin to believe your own press. They say like, "Man, I sure am great." Well, we don't realize that I didn't think that about myself.
Yeah.
I actually needed to be great. I needed God's help, and then God shows up, and then we forget how we got there.
Yeah, I think too about where were the people around Solomon, or maybe it was stories of men or women I know that have failed and not worked to restore. Where were the people around them that could tell them no? Yeah. Where were the ones that could say, hey, maybe this many wives or concubines is a bad idea.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
you
know that woman worships this God, and you're building a temple to that God. What are you doing? That, someone around them to say, no, this is not us.
Yeah. I tell a story about that very thing in the book, A Life That Works. I was talking to a guy who did consulting for organizations, and a lot of it was churches, and he was brought in trying to resolve an issue in a big church, and he asked the question of the senior pastor, who in this room around this table has the authority to say no to you, and you're going to listen? And he said, well, nobody. And in that moment, the consultant realized there's nothing I can do here.
Right.
My hands are kind of tied, because as a leader, if you're not willing to listen to the people that care about you, not just any old buddy, but the people who are closest to you, who have skin in the game, so to speak, well, then you're in a very dangerous spot, man. When you're alone and isolated, no one is above dumb decisions. Yeah.
What does that look like in someone's life that's not a pastor or a ministry? What does it mean, to just a business owner or an employee, a husband or a wife? Like, what does that mean? Because I've lived in ministry for so long. I've been in ministry since I was pretty young. I know what that needs to look like in a missions organization or a church organization. But what does that need to look like in a family or the individual? Like, what does it mean to have someone in your life that can tell you no?
Well, you think about, maybe the question answers with a question. Who in your life has spoken to you in moments of decision or moments of temptation or moments of testing that you actually have benefited from? Someone who brought a word fitly spoken is like, apples in a setting of gold. Proverbs says Proverbs says, even faithful are the wounds of a friend. So there's something about those friendships, those companions along the way that I think they bring us something that we just lack in and of ourselves. They can be mirrors, they can be guides or whatever. So
a mentor, someone
coach
who, like
or-
a guide,
Yeah.
someone who can come
Companion.
alongside you and say, "Hey, I believe this decision you're making is a wrong decision."
Yeah. Yeah. Is this a wise choice? I
Yeah.
mean, and it doesn't even have to be a rebuke, although Proverbs talks about that as well. You know,
Yeah.
a rebuke impresses a wise man more than 100 lashes on the back of a fool.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think these people in our lives, they're not non-existent. I think we have to be open to having them,
Yeah.
right? There's people all around us that could serve that purpose.
Yeah.
And
Yeah, but you have
community, we talk about community all the time.
Yeah, but they kind of have to be given permission.
Right?
I know
They have
for
to be
me,
invited in.
there are people in my life that I've given permission. Like, I want you to know you can tell me
Yeah.
this, or you can tell me,
Yeah.
and I'll listen to you. Because I think most people don't want to give that permission, and others aren't bold enough to say those things unless given the permission. Like, this will happen to us as pastors often. Someone will say, "Hey, pastor, this," or "Hey, pastor, that,"
Yeah.
and we often wonder, when crisis comes, am I your pastor?
Yeah. What does that mean exactly?
Yeah, what does that mean to you? When you say pastor, what does that mean? Because you're doing something dangerous or foolhardy right now. And if I'm your pastor, I want to tell you something about it. I want you to say, I want to say to you, no. But if I'm just your friend, if I'm just your,
Just
hey,
another opinion.
a great speaker, then I don't, you're not going to listen to me. So what does it mean to be your pastor?
Well, again, it's a recognition, I think, of God's care for us, right? He puts people in our lives that, let's just, the easy one is like our fathers, right? So he puts us in, we're not born feral wolves or cats.
Right.
We're born into families. We're born into a union between a man and a wife, and hopefully that's a healthy union and that's a healthy environment. But as you're growing up, a father is the guy, or a mother too, and not just a father, but a father is the guy who kind of helps us make those decisions, lets us. He gives us a little more freedom as we grow, but he's always there to sort of counsel us. Now, if I have a non-existent father, or I don't listen to my father, or my father and I, if our relationship is estranged, well, I'm going to revert back to making decisions on my own. And so it's a powerful concept. I mean, but no one gets around that. I don't think anybody lives above that principle. You and I are part of life groups,
Right.
And a bunch of life groups that are going on right now at Church on the Hill. And mine is all men, this particular group. And men, the conversation around the room in regards to our fathers is just unbelievably important.
Yeah.
Not just what they did do. Some of that was wonderful, some of it maybe not, but some of it is what they didn't do, or what they didn't say, or when they weren't there. Man, it has such impact on our lives.
Yeah. Absence of a word at the right time can be as painful or destructive as the wrong word. So one of the things that John Piper says about ending well or endings is there needs to be along your life a stewardship of those callings and accountability. So the calling on someone's life could be obviously like a ministry calling, but it can be a work calling. It can be a relationship calling, a family calling. And he describes this stewardship, of, okay, I have a responsibility to maintain some kind of energy and faithfulness to do the work.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So what do you say to someone who is lacking, maybe in a word that's used maybe too often is passion, but like the passion is a little bit gone from the call, but that doesn't mean the call is gone.
Right.
That can happen in marriage often. Like, man, I'm not feeling as in love with my wife today as I did, 10 years ago or something like that. But I'm still just as married to her as I was. I'm maybe more married to her because there's all this, history now. But how do I energize that calling on my life to serve my wife, to serve my community, to work in my business? What would you tell someone struggling to maintain energy for their calling?
I think one of my first comments to something like that, a question like that from somebody, let's just say a younger leader who's just getting started, has a whole life ahead of them, I would say you have to live and think holistically. And what I mean by that is we are created, you and I and everybody on this planet, we're created body, that's what's sitting at the table, soul, that's what we're interacting, emotions and so forth, and spirit. So we're three-part beings, body, soul, and spirit. And I have to take care of all three of those. If I neglect one of those,
That's good.
the whole person is going to
Yeah.
begin to struggle. You know, my father, I remember my dad years ago, World War II vet, telling me that they were in the war, and so they had a responsibility to be soldiers. And he said on the day off, if you decided you were going to go to the beach, it was a legitimate day off.
Yeah.
But if you were careless in the way you treated that, like your body, you got extremely sunburned or you drank too much and you were incapacitated, you could be court-martialed.
Yeah.
Because you belong to the U.S. government.
Yeah, you're still a soldier.
You're still a
on your
soldier,
day
and
off.
you were
Yeah.
not taking care of your body on a day off, which is kind of interesting
that
because
is.
you and I have seen a bunch of outreach
Yeah.
ministries where
my
days off
goodness.
are so dangerous,
Yes.
right?
Yeah, it's
you
so
see
true.
people do they let their guard down. They do the
Yes.
dumbest things on their
Yes.
day off. But
Yeah.
but I think that 3-part being, taking care of my body, which is the whole conversation, my soul and spirit. Those are 3 things that need different kinds of input and maintenance and care.
That's super wise. I wasn't thinking of that answer, but it's so true. And especially for me, I realize when I neglect the physical, the spiritual always suffers.
Oh yeah.
If I neglect and around holidays can be an easy time to do that, to kind of just indulge the physical
just kinda-
and not, maintain the physical, meaning, just our physicality, our body. Then it always has an immediate impact on my spirit, on my emotions.
Yeah,
as
and how
well.
can it not? How can I mean, we've all been super tired and made. I mean, we all remember a decision we made when we really should have taken a nap, but we made the decision and maybe we regretted it. Now, sometimes that's inevitable because life is hard, ministry is hard, but I think there's the practices is what I'm after there.
Yeah.
That I'm aware my body needs certain things, my soul needs certain things, and my spirit needs certain things. My spirit being the place where I relate to God. And I'm using these terms generally, right? But my soul, this thing of, I think if you don't know what feeds your soul, I think you're at a huge disadvantage.
Yeah. No, 100%. I agree. Okay, so part of this as well, we're still talking about endings, is I don't want, some things I want to outlast me, right? Because I'll have an end to everything. Every work, everything. There'll be an end to my life here. But some things I don't want to end there. I want to leave a legacy. I want to leave something that others carry on and hopefully take farther than I went.
Right.
Yeah. Can we just talk about that for a second? What does it mean to leave a legacy? I'll go back to Proverbs 20:7. The righteous who walks in his integrity, blessed are his children after him. So it's kind of what we've been talking about, like this righteousness, integrity, moral upstanding, and that because one person does that, the children after him are going to be blessed. There's going to be a peace on them, a shalom on them. So what does it mean, and how can we leave a legacy? As I think a lot of us are just, I guess so many people that I talk to, and I don't think I always have a perfect sampling, but the ones who come and want to talk to a pastor, they're so in the struggle of day-to-day life. Most of them aren't coming and asking, how do I leave a legacy? They're like, how do I survive this tragedy? How do I get through this problem? How do I overcome this thing? Which are legitimate, and I'm happy to, we're happy to be there as pastors at that moment. But how do we also talk about not just surviving, but actually leaving something behind greater than ourselves and passing something on to others?
Man, that is, I just think that's such a powerful question when you think about, the YOLO culture that we live in. You only live once, live for the moment, don't worry about the future, just be in the moment, live for the moment, make your decisions, which I think is that was the downfall of Solomon. That was it's the foolishness of the age. Now, why would I say that? Now, if there is no God and there is no eternity, then living for the moment makes perfect sense. Yeah. That's a very logical thing to do. Yeah. But what we believe is eternity is our home and the generations is our call. So that's why the writer in Psalm said, one generation shall tell the next. That's why we talk so much about intergenerational ministries. So into that comes legacy. Yeah. And a definition I put together that it's a lot of different things, but here it is. Legacy is the long-lasting impact of a person's life in future generations that are a result of their key life decisions today and in their past.
Yeah.
So what I do is I make decisions based not just in the moment, but in how this will ripple or domino into my future and the future of people around me. So I think, first of all, my own future. I want to finish well. I want to be congruent in my lifestyle. I want to be consistent. But I also want my sons to benefit from my choices. And I want my grandchildren. And then I want the people we work with, right?
Yeah.
So legacy is this eye on the future, but it's making decisions in the present that are going to,
Yeah.
Yeah. And people do this kind of financially to some degree. I mean, I was reading an article the other day by Warren Buffett. He wrote this article. It was an article, actually, a letter to his shareholders about what he's going to do with all of his money. And he was talking about how he has really sat down with a whole bunch of smart people, Bill Gates the same way, and thought through, what are we going to do? Because if we just gave it all to our kids, we'd ruin their lives. So what are we going to do in our philanthropy and other that we leave a legacy?
I heard George Lucas the other day, the Star Wars guy, had several $1 billion, and he's already given almost all of it away to teachers because he felt like that's where I can make the most impact. If I'm going to do something, I'm going to give it to the people who are trying to train kids of the future. I don't know anything about that. I don't know the details, but I just thought, oh, that's really interesting.
But they've got it. I mean, they're onto something, right?
Yeah, they are. They're onto something. And I, when I think about us personally, one of the names that comes to mind is Jerry Hune. Pastor
founder
Jerry
of our church,
founder
of our school,
founded the school, Cross Hill Christian School. I mean, a very humble beginnings. I wasn't around for the beginnings of what I hear. Very small,
very simple,
very humble beginnings.
They're just going to love kids,
and it slowly grew from just a couple grades to all the elementary grades to then the middle school grades were added. Now the high school grades are added. There's a building now for the high school. The gym that they practice in and play in all the time is the Jerry Hune gym. And he's still living. He's still, but he's ahead of us in age, and he's left something for us to steward and take responsibility for. And more directly would be Pastor Adam, who is
picked up that baton.
And he's left. Even in the time that he's been there, he's added to that legacy. The high school would have been you and him, and the church, building the high school building at that time. And then okay. Who gets that baton next? What does that look like?
Yeah, because no one is. It's an illusion to think. It's interesting to watch leaders who hold on too long because they won't admit that they're mortal, I guess, or something, or insecurity, or some reason. But we're all temporary players, aren't we, on the stage?
Yeah.
And if we don't think about the future, I think then oftentimes you think about all the experience. Let's just say someone who's been in ministry for 40 or 50 years. Imagine the wealth of experience and knowledge and so forth they've had, both from good decisions and bad decisions, but they've hung in there.
Yeah.
And for all that to just disappear when they leave, it's just, in my opinion, that's just tragic. I mean,
someone asked me over Thanksgiving, one of the family members, like, well, what's your plans for retirement? One day, I laughed because I kind of have a dumb pat answer that I give when people say that, like, I'm just going to slump over in the pulpit one day. It's a morbid joke, but what I'm trying to convey is I just plan on doing ministry for the rest of my life.
Yeah,
I won't, be the lead pastor for the rest of my life because someone else will be that.
Sure.
But I won't end ministry because I don't believe
pursue my call.
Yeah, exactly. I'm going to pursue my call. I don't believe there's an end to this or retirement to this. There'll be a change. Like there's been many changes from the time I was 20 till now I'm 53. There's been lots of changes in ministry over those years.
Sure.
And there'll continue to be changes. But I don't think there'll be an end until eternity.
Well, that's the funny thing. I mean, my wife and I had this very conversation while we were gone for the weekend, just talking about the next season of our lives. And I don't, the idea of retirement is a pretty Western concept. Because in most cultures, people just work and they work, and they slow down, or maybe they retool a little bit. But the idea of just stepping out of my calling, our calling is, I think you and I have both been called to teach and to preach and to pastor the people of God and see the kingdom of God advance. Now, I don't know what would my life look like if I walked away from that.
I have a little theory that it's in our Western culture, what we're trying to do is make a little heaven on earth.
Yeah.
We're trying to put an end to work
Right.
and
Yeah.
say, oh, now is the time where I only, what our imagination of heaven, not the heaven that I actually see in Scripture, but our imagination of heaven is, I've earned all the money I need. I can completely rest. I can do whatever I want with my days. I'm completely free from constraints. No one has any, pull on me. I owe nothing to a boss. I owe nothing to the calendar. I owe nothing to anybody. I'm free. I think that's our idea of heaven. That's not what we see in Scripture as heaven, but that's our idea of it. And we try to create it here on earth. And I think that's
so
that's
interesting.
a failure, in my opinion.
Well, and it's such a deception too, because we were made for significance.
Well, that's why so many people, unfortunately, after they retire to that sort of retirement, just
they
go
go
downhill really fast.
Yeah.
Yeah, because they weren't made to live like that.
And significance comes from partnering with God. And so once I sort of retire from that and God go find somebody else, I just think that the whole, and we've known people in our lives who have refused to go that direction. Lauren Cunningham's a great example. Recently passed away last year, who to the end of his life, I believe he was in his 80s, was
I think so.
continuing to preach and teach and mentor and inspire people to missions. And I've known, again, a dozen more people like that have inspired me because they never quit. you know. Caleb, when he was in his 80s, said, "Hey, I'll take the hill country." And what an inspirational guy! Rather than, "Hey, let's just camp out here and I'll build myself a nice condo and play pickleball."
You know what's interesting too, because I think the last point before we close is one of the things about ending well is having a focus on eternity. And some of the names we mentioned just a few minutes ago, Warren Buffett, Bill Gates. Steve Jobs, George Lucas. These are people that have never professed any belief in an eternity.
Yeah.
They really believed it all just ends here. And so that's the way they live as well.
That's so
Now,
interesting.
I'm gonna enjoy all my money as long as I can, but after I'm gone, well, I'm just someone else. I'll try to leave, and to their benefit, that's better than blowing it all.
Right,
I
than just
appreciate
being a total
that.
hedonist.
But that's their imagination of real legacy and eternity is someone needs to remember my name. There better be a building with my name on it or a foundation with my name on it, the Bill and Linda Gates Foundation. And I certainly appreciate that more than the person who won't share any of their wealth. But I think Christianity and real faith is saying, actually, I can give you so much more than a monetary inheritance to my kids. I want to give a monetary inheritance to my kids. I hope I have something to leave my kids. I don't want to spend it all. I want to leave something for them. But if I left them a good amount of money and didn't give them my faith,
what have I left them?
What have I left them?
Yeah. The passage that comes to my mind, I know we have to finish, is God has placed eternity in our hearts.
Right, yeah.
Right? And so we were made by God. Here's what we believe as Christians. We were made by God. We were made for God, and we were made for the earth. And so when I'm involved in that in some form or fashion, life comes into me and life goes out of me. So those guys, the Gates and the others, I'm not, again, sure of what they believe as far as the Christian faith of the Bible or eternity, but the fact is they're created in the image of God.
Yeah.
And they realize they've been gifted. All those men, the thing they have in common is they realize that they were gifted, either gifted with opportunity, gifted with intelligence or innovation or whatever, and they have a responsibility. So but I think that's the, if you will, the stamp of God on their brains, on their beings.
Yeah, so I think, speaking as pastors to, I'm sure most people that would be listening to this are coming to our church on Sundays, speaking to them about ending well and focusing on eternity, where are those places that you can invest that'll give eternal dividends, right?
Yeah.
Because... And I'm not saying that work is a lesser thing or earning a paycheck is a lesser thing, because those are created by God. We do that. We provide for our family. We provide for our own needs. But if that's all there is, I think we're falling short. And I see the people who, some of our volunteers, I'm just so blown away with.
Yeah.
They just show up in kids' lives.
Yeah.
One of the guys in our life group, that's probably okay to say his name, Andrew, great guy, just a great guy, doesn't have a whole lot of years of salvation. He's relatively new, to faith, him and his wife, both. but he has jumped in with both feet. He is making an eternal impact in the lives of middle schoolers, where he volunteers on a regular basis. I know he got to speak just the other night, and I think it was the first time he'd ever shared like that in front of a group. And I just think, yeah, go for it, man, go for it. Leave a legacy, make an eternal contribution. You'll never be sorry that you did.
Make a difference.
Yeah, make a difference. All right. Wow. Well, thanks, Bruce. I appreciate it. Happy anniversary.
Thanks. Yeah.
Yeah. Your guys' marriage is, I know it's
My wife deserves that crown.
Yeah.
Living with me all these years.
I know your marriage has been a blessing to both of you, but it's been a blessing to a lot of us as well. And while you were away for a couple of days, we as staff, we just prayed for you guys, and very thankful for you. Your guys' witness of loving one another is a great example to the rest of us as well.
Yeah. I'm grateful. Grateful to God, grateful to her. She's been a huge blessing to
and you both
my life and
have birthdays right around here.
Everything
too.
lands in December with us, man.
It does.
I would never do that again if I had a chance.
Well, you didn't get to choose when you were born.
I didn't get to choose when I was born. But
all right, folks. Well, thank you so much for joining us with this podcast. If this would be a blessing to somebody else, I encourage you to share it with someone. And be praying, asking God, like, God, where is my eternal contribution today? What today do I do or say or how do I leave a lasting impact on the
big
world
or
around me?
small.
Yeah, big or small.
Even the littlest thing.
Yep. All right. Bless you guys. We'll see you on Sunday.